What's up, CodefForge here. Today we'll learn how to implement paging, sorting and filtering in Java Spring Boot application. And to achieve this, we will use Criteria API. On the screen you can see the project setup. We are using Spring Initializer and we will use following dependencies. H2 database as our in-memory database engine where we will store our data. Spring Web for starting our application and exposing REST endpoints. And of course Spring Data JPA, so we'll use the Hibernate to implement our database access layer. Later on we'll also add Swagger UI, so we'll be able to test our REST endpoints from the web browser. Okay, so we can generate the project and open it in the IDE. It is already imported, so in the first place we want to go to the main directory, sources, main, resources, and we want to open application properties. Over here I will paste some configuration, and this is basically the setup of the JPA and the database. If you want to know what's going on over here in details, you can check out my video which is dedicated to the H2 database setup. To implement paging, sorting and filtering, we'll need entity to work with. So we will navigate to the Java, our main package, and inside we want to create a new package and we'll call it model. Inside we'll create our new class, so we want to select new Java class and we'll call it employee. First of all, we want to mark it with the entity annotation, and also we will specify the table name, so we want to use the table annotation and we will use name attribute. So now we can pass the name of the table and it will be the same as the class name. Each of our employee will have the primary key, so we want to use the ID annotation together with the generated value annotation. In the generated value annotation we'll specify the strategy and we'll set it to auto. We of course want to put those on the private long ID property, so it will store the primary key. Our entity will have two more properties, and the first one will be private string first name, and the second one will be private string last name. We will also need default constructor for the Hibernate, so let's generate one. And here we will select none. And one more constructor for our properties, and we will need it for the first name and last name. We don't have to do it for the ID since it's auto-generated value. We will also generate the getters and setters, so it will be possible to serialize and deserialize our objects. So we want to go over here and we want to select getters and setters. And we want to do it for each of our properties, but we'll remove the set ID because it will be auto-generated and we don't have to do it manually. So our entity is ready. Now we can move on and create the repository for it. So we want to right click on our main package, select package, and we'll call it repository. Inside we want to create a new interface. So we select new Java class, we change it to the interface and we will call it employee repository. Here in the first place we want to mark our interface with the repository annotation, and also we want to make it extend the CRUD repository. So we say extends CRUD repository, and it is generic type, so we have to provide the entity for which we want to create the repository. So in our case it is employee, and also we have to provide the type of the primary key for this entity, and it will be long. We will use this repository for adding employees to the database, and for paging, filtering and sorting we'll create another repository. So we want to create a new class over here and it will be called employee criteria repository. We'll start with marking it as the repository bin. So we want to go over here and say repository. In the second place, we want to inject EntityManager, but we'll not use the auto-wired approach. We'll use the constructor approach. So we want to say private final EntityManager with the same name. Also, across our methods in the criteria repository, we'll use something that is called CriteriaBuilder. So we'll create a field for it. It will be private final CriteriaBuilder with the same name. And now we want to initialize our fields in the constructor. So we go over here, we want to generate the constructor, and we'll generate it only for the EntityManager like this. And this is because EntityManager will be injected and we'll use it to initialize the CriteriaBuilder. So over here we want to say this CriteriaBuilder, and now we want to assign to it EntityManager get CriteriaBuilder like this. Now we will create a method which will return the page of employees. So we want to go under the constructor and we want to say public. And as I said, we will return the page of the employee. So this is the type. And we have to import the page like this. And the name will be find all with filters, because we also want to filter our results. This method will accept two object arguments. The first one will be employee page, which will store information about the page, like the page size or the page number. And also it will accept the employee search criteria argument, which will store the filters. Let's create them. First one will be employee page. So we want to go to the model, right click it, select new Java class, and we will call it employee page. Our employee page will consist of 4 fields, and the first one will be private int page number, and by default it will be set to 0, so it will return first page. The second one will be the private int page size, and by default it will be set to 10. Next field on our list is private, and it is the type of sort.direction, and the name will be sort direction, and by default it will be set to ascending order, so we want to say sort.direction.ascending. And the last one will be the default sort field. So we want to go over here, we want to say private string sort by, it's the name of the field, and by default we want to sort using the last name property. So we'll use the values from the last name column or field to sort our results. We will also need getters and setters for those fields. So we'll go over here and we'll select getters and setters, and we want it for each of our fields. Employee page is ready, so now we can move on and create another class. And this one will be called employee search criteria. Over here we will have 2 fields. First one will be private string first name, and the second one will be private string last name. So user will be able to sort the results using the first names or the last names. We will also need getters and setters, so let's generate them. We go over here and we want it for the first name and for the last name. This one is also ready, so we can go back to the employee criteria repository. Now we are ready to define the parameters for our method. So it was employee page, which is over here, and we'll use the same name as the type. And also employee search criteria over here, and we'll also use the same name as the type, and we'll move it to the another line like this. Now the interesting part begins, and we want to start with creating CriteriaQuery. So we go to the body of our method and we want to say CriteriaQuery. And this is generic type because we have to specify for which entity we want to create the query, and we want to do it for the employee. And we'll call this CriteriaQuery, and we want to assign to it CriteriaBuilder.createQuery, and now we have to specify the class for which we want to create this query. And since we are doing it for the employee entity, it will be employee.class. So we have defined that the result of our criteria query will be the employee type. Now we have to specify from which entity we want to retrieve this result. In our case, it will be the same type. So we want to go over here and we want to say root. And it is also the generic type, and we'll say employee here. And we have to import it like this. And we'll call it employee root. And we'll assign here criteria query dot from, and again it will be employee dot class. So we have the query and we have the query root. So we know what will be the type returned by the query and from which entity we want to retrieve this result. Now we want to define our predicates, and in our case, predicates will filter our results. We want to go over here and we will create our predicate variable with the same name. And we want to assign to this variable the result of the method, which we will call getPredicate. And this method will be called with the following arguments. It will be employee search criteria and also employee root. And now let's generate this method. So we'll go over here and we'll hit enter. And let's move this to the another line. Now we'll implement our getPredicate method and we'll start with creating the list of predicates. So we'll say list predicate and we'll call it predicates, but we have to import the list in the first place. So it will be predicates and we want to assign memory. So we'll say new array list. Our filter values are optional, so user can pass them or not. And because of that, we have to first check if the values are not null. So we have to go here and we'll say if, and we'll use the static method from the objects and it will be non-null. And here we'll pass the search employee search criteria dot get first name. And if it's true, we want to add the predicate to our predicates list. So we want to say predicates dot add, and now we'll use the criteria builder. And when we are searching for the particular string in the database, we want to use the like. And here we want to use the employee root get first name because we are filtering using the first name. And now as the second argument of the like method, we want to pass the expression. And we want to make it work the way that the user don't have to pass the full first name. He can pass, for example, the first letter on the last few words. So we will precede it with the %, and we will concatenate it with the value provided by the user. So we'll say employee search criteria over here, get first name, and we'll at the end append the % again like this. So let's move it to another line, maybe like this. And here we have to add the semicolon. And we want to do the same for the last name. So we'll copy this if statement here and we'll paste it. And now we of course want to change the get first name to the get last name. And also over here we want to get last name instead of the first name. And the same goes here. So we'll copy it and paste over here. Our predicates looks good, so now we have to return them. We go under the if statement and we say return. And now we can use the criteria builder and connect our predicates with the AND operator, like this, by calling the AND method. And now we want to pass our predicates, and we want to say to array new predicate, and we can pass the size of 0 here, and it will be good. So basically we are merging our predicates into one final predicate using the AND operator, and then we are returning it over here. So our predicate is ready. Now we have to use it. So we go over here and we'll say CriteriaQuery.where, and we'll pass our predicate. So right now our data can be filtered using the first name or the last name. Now we want to sort our results. So we will create another helper method and we'll call it setOrder. And it will be called with the 3 different arguments, and it will be employee page. The second one will be the criteria query, and the third one will be our employee route. So let's create this method. We'll go over here and we'll say create method. And to stick to the order, we will move it to the bottom. And we will also take care of the parameters over here. This one is quite easy. We'll start with the if statement, and inside the if statement we will check if the employee page dot get sort direction is equal to the sort dot direction dot ascending. And if it's true, we want to order our results in the ascending order. And to do it, we want to say CriteriaQuery.orderBy. And over here, we'll use the CriteriaBuilder.ascending for the ascending order. And we'll use our employee route.get. And we want to get employee page.get sort by. Like this. So basically what's going on over here, we are retrieving from the employee page the information about the sort by field, and we can sort our results using the first name or the last name. By default, it is the last name. And also we are using the criteria builder to specify the order. So it can be ascending order or descending order, and in this case it is ascending order. We can do the same for the descending, and if the direction will be set to descending, we want to copy this, say else, and we'll paste same over here, but we'll change the ascending to descending, like this. So this is basically it. Our data will be sorted right now, so we can go back to our main method. We have the filtering, we have the sorting, so now we can finally create our query to make a request to the database. So we'll go over here and we'll create something that is called typed query. And it is the generic type, so we have to specify the entity for which is this query, and in our case it is employee, and we'll call it typed query. And now we will assign to it the EntityManager.create query, and we'll pass our criteria query as the argument here. We have created typed query basing on the criteria query, and now we have to set the first result that will be returned. So we can use the typed query and we can call the setFirstResult method. And we can do it by saying employee page dot get page number, and we want to multiply it by employee page dot get page size, like this. We also should define how many entries we want to return, and to do this we will use the typed query setMaxResults method. And in our case, the max result is equal to the size of the page. So we want to say employee page get page size, like this. Next one on our list is the pageable object, which you should know from my previous video about the paging and sorting, where we are using the paging and sorting repository. So let's create one. We will go over here and it will say pageable from the Spring framework, and it will have the same name, and we want to assign to it the result of the getPageable method, which we will create, and we'll call it with the following argument, and it will be the employee page. So we want to generate it. We'll go over here and hit generate, and we will move it at the bottom. Over here, in the first place, we want to create the sort object. So we want to say sort with the same name, and we'll assign to it the result of the static method from the sort. And the method is called by. Over here we have to pass few arguments, and it will be the employee page get sort direction, and the second argument is the employee page dot get sort by. Since we have the sort object, now we can go here and say return, and we want to return the page request and call the static method off, and inside we'll provide the arguments. So it will be employee page dot get page number. The next one on the list is the size, so we want to say employee page dot get page size, and the last one is the sort object, so we want to pass the sort like this. GetPageable method is ready, so we can go back to our find all with filters method. Now we will create the count query, which will allow us to retrieve the total amount of entries with the applied predicates. In the first place, we will create a variable which will store the employees count. So we'll say long employees count, and we want to assign to it the result of the get employees count method, and this method will accept one argument, and it will be predicate. And we are using the same predicates because we want to get the total count of the employees with the applied filters, and we don't want to limit it like we did it over here for the entries. Let's generate it. And it looks good. We'll move it to the bottom like this. In the body, first of all, we want to create a new query. So it will be the criteria query, and this time it will be the type of long, and we'll call it count query. And like before, we want to use the criteria builder, and we want to say it create query long.class. So this time we have specified that the result of the query will be the long type. Next step is to create the root. So we will say root, and it is generic, so it will be the employee type this time, and we'll call it count root. And we want to assign to it the count query dot from employee dot class. And you can see the difference between the regular query and the count query, because in this case we are declaring that the result is the long number, and we are still working with the employee entity. And now we can use our count query over here to call select, and thanks to the CriteriaBuilder.count method, we can say that we want to count the number of employees using the count root. And we can also apply the predicates using the where method and by passing the predicate like this. We can finish our method by using return statement, and now we will use EntityManager dot create query, and we will pass our count query as the argument, and we will retrieve the result like this. It should work. We can go back to our main method here. And the last thing we have to do over here is to return new page implementation object. So we want to say return new page implementation, and it has following arguments. The first one will be the typed query, which we have created over here. So we want to say typed query, and we want to call the getResultList method. Next argument is the pageable, which we have created. And the last argument is the employees count. So we want to say employees count over here. Our criteria repository is ready. So now let's create a service. We want to create a new package first. So we go over here and we'll call it service. Now inside we want to create a new class, and it will be employee service. We want to mark it with the service annotation. So Spring will create a bin for this. And also we want to inject following bins. So we want to say private, final, and the first one will be employee repository interface, which we have created. And the second one will be private, final, employee criteria repository. Now we can generate the constructor, and we want it for the both of the repositories, and we hit enter and we'll move it to the another line. Now we can create our methods, one for retrieving the employees and one for adding the employees. So we'll go over here, and the first one will be public page, and it is the generic type. So we'll say employee over here and we'll import the page, and now we'll call it get employees. The second one, let's create it. It will be public employee, and it will be called add employee. Get employees method will have following parameters. So the first one will be employee page with the same name, and the second one will be employee search criteria with the same name. So over here we are passing the page information and also the information about the filters. And all we have to do in the body of our method is to say return, and we'll use our employee criteria repository, and we'll call the find all with filters method, which we have implemented. And it can be called with the following arguments. The first one is the employee object, and the second one is the employee search criteria. The second method is also quite easy. It will accept the employee object like this, and also we have to say return, but this time we will use the employee repository, and we'll say save, and we'll pass our employee over here. Our service is good, so we can take care of the controller. Let's create a package in the first place. We'll call it controller, and we'll also create a class inside, and it will be employee controller. We want to mark it with the REST controller annotation in the first place, and also we'll specify the global mapping for our methods. So we want to say request mapping, and here we will provide the path, and it will be employees like this. We will inject employee service, so we want to say private final employee service with the same name, and we'll generate the constructor to initialize it. We will have two endpoints. Let's create one for retrieving employees, so it will be get mapping, and now the methods, so it will be public response entity, and we will be returning here the page for the employee type. And we have to import the page, and the name of the method will be get employees. We will have two arguments over here. The first one will be employee page with the same name, and the second one will be employee search criteria, also with the same name. It's not fitting the screen. I will zoom out. Inside our method, we want to say return new response entity, And we want to use our employee service, and we want to call the getEmployees method. And it accepts employees page, so we want to say employee page, and also the employee search criteria. And the second argument of the response entity constructor is the HTTP status, so we want to say OK. And now the second endpoint for adding the employees, so we want to use the post mapping annotation, and we want to put it on the public response entity employee method, and it will be called add employee. Our add employee method will accept request body, so we want to use the request body annotation over here, and this request body will be the type of employee with the same name. So we'll receive the employee object from the body, and all we have to do is to say return new response entity, and inside we want to access the employee service and call the add employee method. And we can simply pass the employee object from the request body. We also want to specify the status, and it will be OK. I think we are done with the controller. So we can navigate to the pom.xml over here, and in the dependencies we will add the Swagger UI. It looks like a good spot, so we'll say dependency over here. And we want to add Spring Fox Boot Starter from the IO Spring Fox version 3. It is also worth to click this button over here to reload the Maven dependencies. I think we can finally start the application, so we go to the Maven, Plugins, Spring Boot, and Spring Boot Run. And after a few seconds, our application should be up and running on the port 8080. It looks good, so we can open the Swagger UI. Okay, here we are in the web browser. We are on the localhost port 8080, and we are on the swagger-ui/index.html path. We can find our employee controller over here and our two endpoints. So let's start with adding some employees, so we will be able to work with something. You should already know how it works because we did it in the previous video. So let's say try it out, and we'll remove the ID because we don't need it. It will be ignored anyway, and let's add the employee that will be called John Doe. And it looks like the add endpoint is working because we got the ID1 with the John Doe in the response body. Let's add him 2 more times, and now we'll change it and we'll add Tom Smith, and we'll add him 3 times also. Okay, looks good. ID is 6, so we should have 6 entries. Let's open the employees endpoint over here. Let's try to change the page size to 5. We have to click try it out first, and let's say execute. It looks good. We have how many entries? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks good. And let's check the metadata. We can see the page size is set to 5 and the total elements is 6. That's correct because we have added 6 entries, and the total pages is 2. That's correct. So let's go back to the top. Let's check out if our filtering is working. So let's say we want to filter only the Doe guys, and we'll say execute, and we want to scroll down, and we have 3 entries. That's good. And the total elements is also 3 and is also correct. Let's make a few more tests. So now let's remove Doe and let's put OE, and let's hit execute, and we should also get 3 entries, and is also correct. So now our like with percent worked. And the last test, let's check out if our sorting is working. So we'll sort by ID, and we'll hit execute, and we have 1, 2, 3, so it is correct. Okay guys, so this is all for today. Thank you for watching. We have learned how to implement paging, sorting, and filtering using the Spring Data and Criteria API. It was quite a long video, but I hope it will be helpful for some of you. And yeah, thank you, and remember about subscribing to the channel and liking the videos. See you next time, bye!